Hey there! Thank you for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and today we are continuing our series looking at the Bionicle fan-created canonized models. These are not official sets, but instead they have been officially accepted into Bionicle canon by the story team leads like Greg Farshtey, either via official LEGO contests or the currently running TTV canonization contests, which are endorsed by Greg Farshtey. So today we have a very fun one. This is a very obscure model. It is the Spiny Stone Ape. So this was a model that appeared all the way back in the 2005 Rahi book. It was featured alongside a ton of other Rahi where people had sent in submissions to LEGO to be accepted into the official canon contest for depicting different creatures around the Bionicle universe. So as such, the storyline significance is not anything too crazy. I mean, it's just a big monkey, and honestly it appears on like Mata Nui, Metru Nui, you can see some on Voya Nui, but there's nothing too wild going on. Obviously this is just one member of the species, so it's not like it has a distinct personality or something, unlike many of the other canon reviews, although it did get a lot of different mentions throughout the Bionicle storyline. And this is actually a really fun model to build and get into. So before we get started here, I want to clarify just a few things about specifically how I was able to put this guy together. I based this off of a stud.io file that was posted on Reddit a few months ago. The builder admitted that it wasn't 100% correct. For instance, there was a Technic beam of a certain length that did not appear in the old dark gray. You can kind of see it standing out, and you'll see it more when we zoom in. It is in the new version of dark bluish gray instead of dark gray. So this beam didn't actually exist in this length at the time this model was built. So there was obviously some other way that the builder designed this model, but it's not 100% clear exactly how that was done, given that the next longest beam in the way that this is currently constructed kind of hits the other spine here. So it's not 100% accurate. I still don't know how the original builder achieved it, and for all we know, maybe they just chopped a beam or something. So that being said, other than that, this is almost 100% correct. It's very accurate based on the exact depiction in the book, and I of course have the instruction set to thank for that I generated from the stud.io file. I would not have been able to reverse engineer this big monster myself, but the only other difference is that I actually had to swap out some pieces for the eyes, and I'll make a note of it when we zoom in. I just very slightly changed the type of Technic connector. The specific correct piece is supposed to be a kind of T connector that was used to connect axles horizontally and vertically. That piece in orange is actually really rare, and I went on Bricklink, and at the time I was building this, it was only available from some international stores, and I really wasn't interested in buying internationally just to get two Technic pieces, so I swapped them out for virtually identical pieces. They just are pin and axle acceptors. You can literally see no difference unless you really squint and zoom in. But other than that, this build is pretty much exactly what you can see in the book. Anyone who is a repeat viewer of some of these videos may know that I review these models on a scale. These are on 4 points, the first of which being Posability. So how well can you get it into good poses? Can you move it around, maybe lift up the arms and whatnot? And how realistic does it able to feel like it's being posed around as a creature? Number 2 is building techniques. So how good are the building techniques used in this? Are they simply taking elements of different sets and slapping them on, or is there actually some thought that's gone into the proportions and how this is put together? And moving on from that, we have overall aesthetics. So how does this look overall as a creature, just completely agnostic of the Bionicle universe? Does it look cool? Does it look intimidating? And number 4 is how well does it fit in the Bionicle canon? So what I mean by this is that, does this realistically look like something, say, a Matoran or a Toa would encounter along their quests? Does it look like a Rahi in this example that actually could have lived on Mata Nui or Metru Nui? For example, something that would not work maybe is if someone had canonized a completely CCBS model. Well, I love CCBS myself. That obviously doesn't quite fit in with the aesthetic of G1. Or maybe they just built a system model and called it a Bionicle mod. It's kind of stuff like that, little things that can be included here that maybe throw me off a little bit from the Bionicle aesthetic, but I mean, I can say right now, this one fits in pretty well. So without further ado, let's just get started with the review and dive right into this model. All right, so here we are. This is the Spiny Stone Ape. You can see immediately that it is a really large creature. I mean, if you just look at the size of my hand compared to this, it looks really large and imposing. And that's one of the things that really drew me to this model, just going all the way around, because I know this one isn't really documented that well compared to some of the other models. You can see that there's some really great parts usage with the Dinosaur Fin here, a lot of the Parok shields, and a ton of Roxy pieces that really just go all the way around. Even the feet have these Mata limbs that wrap around here, and you can really just see that this is a pretty well constructed and beefy Rahi with large legs that do support its weight relatively well, and even a large tail with some interesting things done with the color scheme that's kind of flipped around. And as you can see, this tail can support its own weight, so that's really great to see. I mean, you can leave it in this position and it looks just great like that. It doesn't have to rest on the ground like a lot of other tails, so immediately this is looking like a pretty good model. But let's start off with just the posability, and this is where things get a little bit interesting, because as you can see, obviously it's on all four legs. You can get it into a position where it's like swiping up, let's say it's kind of clawing at you, but it kind of takes a lot of fiddling, yeah, like that. So you can see you can actually get it to a position where only 3 of the limbs are on the ground, and you can have this 4th one kind of raised in the air, but that's really all you can do. You can't really get it to stand upright while still retaining the position and imagery of the beast, because obviously he needs these 2 front legs to stay in position. And just for ease of the review, I will put this back down, but you can see it is possible to get it in a pose, although I will say that it really depends on the surface that you're on, because if you look here, the only thing that's actually touching the ground here, and if we move the tail out of the way, I can just move this back a little bit further. The only pieces that are actually touching the ground are these Takanuva Staff of Light pieces, and so there's a very small surface area that is actually touching the ground here. And that's one of the things that if you have it on maybe a hardwood surface or something that isn't really firm, like this one actually has a lot of friction on it because of the material I'm using, you can tend to have it slip and slide, and it can kind of fall forwards and not support its own weight. So that is a bit of a downside in terms of posability, because it really does depend on the exact surface that you're using here. But then actually there's some interesting things you can go on. If I move this gently here, you can see the claw pincers can snap back and shut, so you can actually see that he's clamping his pincers there. Obviously you can rotate the arm relatively well, although it's not really meant to be rotated completely, but I mean, you can get some pretty good poses out of this. This part of the arm, obviously it's just mounted on a ball joint, so you can rotate that, and it's the same for the other arm on that side. The head, despite having these tubes kind of wrapping around, you can really move it around and get it into some really expressive poses, especially like he's looking off to the side, or looking over there, looking up even, looking down. So you can really get this into some really fun poses just with the head and front arms alone. When we move along to the back and sides of the creature, you can see the back legs here. It's a little bit more fishy because it's having some trouble supporting the weight of the model. You can kind of see it flopping a little bit here. The way that this is mounted here really just doesn't support the weight all too well. Really, most of the weight is just on the front pieces here. Although I will have to say that the detailing, especially on the foot, looks really good. They've actually gone the whole length to actually put this brown tube in between, have these claw pieces, the galley hook pieces, curve around this Technic piece right here. I believe actually one other inconsistency. This is supposed to be dark gray, not black. Totally my bad. I think I messed up in the ordering, but it really doesn't make too much of a difference. So there actually isn't actually a color clash there. It should have been dark gray. But other than that, it's very consistent in terms of the color scheme. And you can see this all the way around. The tail has different points of articulation here, and you can even move it around, although this piece is relatively firm just because of the way it's mounted, which actually I don't mind. I actually really like how it feels more fixed to me. You can kind of see him beginning to collapse on the front here, and that's kind of what I meant in terms of stability problems, but if we just wrap him all the way around, yeah, you can see that he was kind of falling over near the front. As long as you're careful with how you set up the front limbs, there's a lower chance of having him fall over. And the good thing is it's really easy to get him back in a good position. It's not like you have to keep fiddling with it to get it in a good position. Once you kind of place these on the ground, you're good to go. So Posability, I'd say pretty good. The fact that he does tend to slump and kind of lose the weight under his arms here is a bit of a con, and the fact that the back legs are relatively useless despite having attached on 2 ball joints. They're relatively useless in terms of actually providing stability. That is a bit of a con, but it's not a major one because, again, you can get him into a good pose and it doesn't actually take that much effort, unlike a lot of the other Canon models. But then now we can move on to building techniques. And now this is really interesting to me. One of my favorite things about this model, the head popped off, we'll get to that in a second. One of my favorite things about this model is the way that the spine is used here, because obviously the name of this model is the Spiny Stone Ape. And how do you represent a large spine on top of a creature? Technic beams. This is just perfect. I mean, look at how well done these beams are put. It really looks like a spine here. Just the lengths of beams used really make it almost look like a Spinosaurus on the back and whatnot, and it's such a unique concept for a creature too. And a lot of the Rahi things in Bionicle, the one thing that I don't like too much about a lot of the builds is that they're essentially just regular earth animals but scaled up. So obviously in 2001 we've got really big scorpions, really big mosquitoes, really big crabs. They went kind of out there a little bit with the Tarakava, which I do like, and the Muaka and Kane Ra. I know it's supposed to be a bull and a cat, but it's a little bit out there. I mean, they've got treads, but for the most part, a lot of the Rahi just look like earthly animals. Now this looks like an animal that you can find on Earth. I mean, it's called an ape, but it also has a big spine sticking out of it. And it's got all these tubes that kind of represent, I don't know, antenna maybe that are sticking out. And it's got pincers on the front. It's got like crab pincers on the front. So such a unique animal. It's kind of a mashup of a ton of different animals. And I think that the way that this is evoked best is just with the spine here. The use of the Technic beams to illustrate a spine is something that's so creative to me and something I really love about this build. One thing I don't love about it, however, is how easy it is to just knock it out of place and kind of make it not look quite right. You can see that if you just brush the top here, that can bend forwards, and then it knocks this whole front part forwards. You can see that this isn't really even attached on the front, it's just kind of hanging on here. So you can very easily get it out of whack, and it kind of takes some fiddling to get the spine looking exactly correctly, which you can kind of see when I set this up originally as well. So that is a bit of a con to me, just the way that this spine is set up, so it's really easy to get it kind of in a weird position. And then moving on to the other building techniques. So as you can see here, this front Rakshi spine is not actually connected to anything on the front, and it simply uses a rubber band wrapped around the arm to kind of portray the curvature of the arm here. Now, that may be a con to some people. I'm gonna be honest though, I'm gonna give this one a bit of a pass for that, especially because of how hard the Rakshi spine is to actually use in models. There's no easy way to actually integrate it without it just flopping forwards or having no friction, because there's nothing this actually connects to other than the corresponding Rakshi Krata holder here. So that is obviously a flaw of the Lego piece and not of the build. And I'd say they have this rubber band placed probably as best they could. I know the melding pterodax kind of does some really crazy things like wrapping it through the top and around the spikes there and whatnot. They didn't need to go too crazy for it. This is honestly fine, and yes, the white does detract a bit from the color scheme. I believe the official model actually used either a green or a black rubber band, so I mean green would have stood out even more, black would have been perfect, so it honestly depends on what kind of rubber band you use, but that is that. The other kind of unique thing is that they use these click hinge pieces. So you can see these click hinge pieces that are normally used on stuff like the Makuta model. It's the same click hinges used on the Galador figures of all things. And they actually use these just to mount the front claws. And I think that's something that's really unique, and I wouldn't have thought of using the piece in this way. It's a lot better than just a regular Technic lift arm, because obviously you've got this curved part here. It actually looks a little bit like muscle or something that actually grew out of it. So that's something that I really do like about this one. The head actually is comprised of even more interesting building techniques. The front of it is a Mada torso. This is Pohatu Mada's torso that's being used as a head here. But the one downside is that it's only held on by that cross axle in the middle of the head. So, I mean, this is the way the head is mounted. It's literally just a beam that sticks into it, and that can cause it to very easily fall off, especially if you're not being careful with these big tubes. You can kind of get it misaligned and have the head fall off. It doesn't happen too often, but it does happen, so that is a bit of a con right there.
And then you can kind of see all around here, there's some interesting parts usage with the Technic stuff kind of going around, but nothing too wild. I do like the use, as I mentioned before, of the Lego Dinosaur Mosasaurus flippers here. I think that's a really cool parts usage with that. And of course the Borak shields work out really well as kind of covers to fit around the body here. Moving on to the back and the legs, and yep, you can see him kind of falling over from in his face right there. So let's just get around and get him. Oh, come on, stand up. So moving on to the legs, this is one thing that I do feel could have been kind of improved with the parts usage. If you move this around, you can see that it's very easy to get it into kind of weird positions. And that's because these two segments of the leg, this upper leg segment, they're not connected to each other at all. They're literally just free moving on ball joints. And the only reason why they're kind of staying together is because of the way that these are situated, which is one block. You can see this is one block piece, and the way that these are mounted so close to each other. But then you can kind of get stuff like you can see the Borak shield pointing outwards and not covering this part of the leg when you move it one way. And the way that the Borak arms are actually connected here make it pretty weak and not really support the weight very well. So that is a con in terms of building techniques. I will say, however, that the foot almost kind of redeems it because the foot is done really well. It's really interesting, and I think it's really nice how it feels like this all comes together very securely. So if we look at the shaping of this foot, you've got the Borak rib cage, the Borak shield here, the hook going around the bottom here, a tube going in, the Mata arms, just all sorts of really well done shaping and construction done for the foot here. And a good range of articulation too, because you can go back and forth on the ball joint, but this ball joint is even mounted to another ball joint, so you can even kind of wiggle it back and forth like so. So that's done really well in my opinion. And then the tail. I actually really like the tail. I mean, it's very simple. It's literally just Rakshi legs with Technic beams along them, but it actually does a good job of kind of keeping it stable and making it so that you cannot actually articulate it too much, which I feel is kind of the point, because sometimes with tails, people just stick a ton of Bionicle parts together. You can get it in really wild scenarios, and they honestly just feel very jumbled to me for a lot of fan creations that just stick limbs together endlessly to form a long tail. This one actually has these Technic pieces, so you kind of have it in a rigid area. It feels like it's maybe like skin or something that's morphing this together and having it be a continuous tail. And of course, having this be in a fixed position makes it feel like a weighted, solid end of a tail, and when you swing it, it doesn't really go that crazily all over the place. So that's something that I actually do like about the tail. The fact that for the most part, you can actually get it to stay up when it needs to. I mean, you can see it falling a little bit, but it's way better than you'd think it would be. That's actually done pretty well in my opinion. So there is the tail. And then moving on, just one last thing to say about the overall look and the front limbs here. It's kind of annoying how you can very easily get these Rakshi foot pieces detached here. You can see that it's very easy to get them out of alignment, but that's just kind of a minor thing. And overall, I'd say the building techniques for this model are very solid, especially given the time period that this was created in. So now that we've covered posability, building techniques, and aesthetics, let's zoom out and take a look at an overhead view. How does this compare to other Rahi, and does this make sense in the Bionicle universe? So let's hop back in for some final thoughts.
Alright, so on to the last point for the Spiny Stone Ape. How well does this make sense in the Bionicle universe and fit into the story? So to do this, I've brought along the Muwaka set, which was from 2001. Obviously, there are a few years separating these models, but basically around the same or similar era of Bionicle. And I think one of the really cool things is that if you kind of look at how the Rahi is built here, it really does look like a Rahi in the Bionicle universe. And this is really helped by the fact that the spine is, again, made out of these Technic beams, kind of just like the Technic beams that make up the body of the Muwaka and Kane Ra, and it's really well done. You can see there's an integration of Bionicle parts, but a lot of the details is actually done by just Technic beams, which, of course, is how the original Rahi worked too. There was a lot of Technic that went into them, and maybe a few Bionicle pieces here and there. I also kind of find it funny how similar they are in terms of using the same golly hook claw pieces for the legs here. And I do like as well the fact that they actually tried to integrate some more animal features into it, especially the dinosaur flippers, which look organic, but they also look like they fit within the Bionicle world. So I think that in terms of how well it fits in the world, it's pretty well done. I mean, I honestly don't have too many complaints where the fitting in is concerned. Yes, it's a little bit awkward around the back, but honestly, if you just zoom out and look at how well it compares to another Bionicle Rahi, it makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm giving this one a thumbs up, 10 out of 10 on the first point here, which is how well does it fit in the Bionicle universe. This is one of the best Rahi that's ever been made, especially with the Technic beams here used as detailing and a blend with the Bionicle parts. So I think this is really well done. But then moving on to how well it works for the other categories, starting off with Posability, I'm gonna have to deduct it a little bit on this one. If you notice, it's really easy for it to kind of fall over. Even the back legs don't really provide it that much stability here. And unless you're really trying to get it in a good position or have a good kind of surface that you can set it on, it just doesn't work too well. Obviously, when I was filming the video, it was on a much better surface to pose, so it wasn't doing this all the time. But you can see it's very easy, depending on the surface that you're using, for it to just kind of splay outwards like that. Maybe if you kind of mess around a little bit with how the limbs are set up here. Yeah, so you can get it into a good position. It's not going to take that much effort, but it does take some effort to get it into a good pose. In terms of the articulation, it's generally pretty good, but again, it's kind of strange how the back legs are formed. They don't really give it that much support at all, so I think in terms of posability, it's going to get a 6 out of 10. If you're putting it on carpet, you're totally good. If you're putting it on a surface with any sort of friction, you're probably going to be good. But any other surface like a hardwood floor or a shelf, you're going to have some trouble getting it to stand up straight. And that is a bit of a con to the model. Although I will say it got extra points by actually allowing you to open and close the pincers. That was a really fun move that they included in the set that I think adds to the playability feature, as well as being able to articulate the tail really well, which I mentioned before, how well it's articulated and jointed in such that less articulation actually makes it seem more realistic and makes it look even better. So that's why it's a bit of a mixed bag, but it's leaning towards above average, 6 out of 10 on that. In terms of overall building techniques, I think this one also will deserve a 6 out of 10. And the reason I say this is that there's some really interesting parts usage, as I mentioned, with the click joints being used to secure things. Obviously, the Technic beams, while simple, are actually displayed in a pretty complex manner such that you can really get the spine to work out well. And I mean, obviously, it was very hard to reverse engineer this for the person who did it, such that they didn't even get it perfectly right to the original models. So I'm just thinking there's probably even more complex stuff going on in the actual thing. So that elevates it a little bit. But then you get to something like the lower leg or back leg here, and you get this kind of awkward jointing on the top part, which I mentioned earlier in the review. They just don't quite fit together that well. They don't give it that much support whatsoever, and it doesn't feel like as much thought went into designing these back legs as it did for the rest of the model. So that is a bit of a con to me on that regard, which is why it only gets a slightly above average 6 out of 10 score. But then we get to overall aesthetics, and I think this one, it's overall very good, and compared to a lot of the other Rahi as seen in the book, it's a lot better than many of them. But then you've got some awkward stuff. Again, the way that this plate piece works and doesn't really cover the entire back leg here. You've got some strange rubber bands going around the top here. You've got kind of a strange looking head with the Technic mass around it. So there's some pros, some cons, although I do think that aesthetically, in general, I mean, you can see how well the feet are made, the tail, the front arms, the body as a whole, the spine. I think this one deserves a 7 out of 10. It's not perfect, it's not the most beautiful or aesthetically pleasing of mocks, but it does its job and looks realistic as a creature in the Bionicle universe. And for a Rahi, that's really all you need. And so that about wraps up this review of the Spiny Stone Ape. Let me know down in the comments below, do you guys like this model? Is this one you're familiar with? Or maybe, hopefully this will inspire some people to build him, and I will link the instructions or the studio file that I got this from down in the description below, so people who want to make this can. Just a very quick note about price. I ordered all of the pieces off of Bricklink. It cost me around $45, not including shipping, so just in case you want to get a kind of rough estimate on the price here, that's about as much as it cost me, which I do think was worth it for a model of this size. It's pretty big. I mean, you'd pay around that much for a medium-sized Titan, especially the discontinued ones would go for a lot more. So I was pretty happy with paying that much for a model of this size. And if you try to use my other video on price optimizing with Bricklink, you might even get it down to even cheaper. So that is a note on that. Let me know down in the comments, do you like this model? What do you want to see reviewed next? I do have quite a few other Rahi Dark Hunters and other canon models up on the docket. I'll give a sneak peek at the next one. It is the Archives Mole. A lot of people have actually been asking me to review the very diminutive but very cute and unassuming Archives Mole. So that one's in the next video. It will be a lot quicker review than usual, but I will be doing that. And then beyond that, just let me know down in the comments, what models do you want to see reviewed? So at this point, I have built pretty much almost all the Dark Hunters. I think I'm missing maybe 3 or 4, and I know at least 2 or 3 of those don't have instructions to them. As far as the Rahi are concerned, a little bit less. I have a few more Rahi, but a lot of them just sadly don't have instructions out. So I'm waiting for people to release instructions for them because I just don't have the time to really just go in-depth on reverse engineering, especially because when I build these, I just order the pieces offhand. So I just like having a spread of all the pieces that I need before I start building. But I do have a lot of the Dark Hunters, and pretty much every other canon model is built. So like the Paraka Fusion, the only one I think I'm missing is the Iron Wolves, but all the Glatorian and whatnot, the Agoria are built. So let me know down in the comments, what do you want to see reviewed next? And until then, stay tuned to Duckbricks for even more LEGO and Bionicle news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thanks, and bye-bye for now.